symptom of white supremacy is that we forget that African people are queer, right? That in this country, queerness has become a synonym of sexual minorities, but the ontological origins of the word queer simply means that which is not in a pejorative position of power. So if you're not a white, cis, heterosexual man, you are queer. If you're a person with a disability, you are queer. As women in a society based on patriarchy, y'all are queer. And we remind folks the Fannie Lou Hamer of it all. None of us are free unless and until all of us are free.
Yeah.
We then show up in progressive, read white LGBTQ spaces, think HRC, Glisten, organizations like that. And it's interesting, I named those two because for the first time in the history of those organizations, they're led by Black leaders who love Black people. HRC, slightly different. There was a Black man before Kelly Robinson is the president now. That's not the point. The point is that we often show up in those spaces reminding white queer people that they have privilege that can often be used to harm us in ways that they don't acknowledge. But the goal is to make sure that we can all get free.
Yeah, yeah.
That's beautiful. I think there's so many different places we can go in this conversation. It feels like when it comes to the Black political experience, we're at a bit of an inflection point in light of the fact that Vice President Harris is the candidate for the Democrats. In light of, I think about even the Zoom call, like the Black woman initiated, which created a whole new fundraising model.
Shout out to Joteka Edie.
Shout out to Joteka. We're just leading in these spaces in a different kind of a way, and it's almost like we got a little edge to it. I'm curious if you feel the inflection point, or maybe it's an iteration of something that's always kind of been.
I think it's probably C, all of the above, right? What I know, and this goes back to the invitation to talk about why MBJC is most relevant now, I would argue that it's always been relevant in part because queer folks, sexual minorities, femme-identified Black women have always lived on the front lines of efforts to get us closer to freedom. Often in June, people engage in pride pimping and rainbow parades without acknowledging that if it weren't for a Black woman, Marsha P. and Oman Johnson, who resisted righteously both laws that were targeting queer people in New York, that said if you wore pants like mine, you could go to jail, that said that if people assumed that or knew that I was queer, they could deny me liquor. That's why we were forced to go to Stonewall. And it was a Black woman in that space where the police would then offer up additional abuse. We know that they're there. They shouldn't be there. Let's go and take advantage of it. Marsha was like, oh, fuck that. We ain't gonna do it. Not on tonight. And then started a whole organization that contributed to what a lot of people now talk about as the LGBTQ movement. We typically celebrate the anniversary of the March on Washington without acknowledging that it was a Black queer man, Bayard Rustin, who was forced by people who he worked in spite of their efforts to destroy and derail that plan. He did that in 2 months in spite of everybody's desire to try and tear that down. That was a Black queer man. And so what I know is two things. I look forward to the day when people are not required to invite in.
Yes.
I don't use the word coming out in part because the way that privilege works, straight people stand with their arms folded and wait for queer people to tell a story about when we realized we were different or weird. And my reality is I've always known I've had superpowers. And the other thing is that information isn't owed to anybody, especially in a space when I can be offered up for additional forms of harm. But if we can do this and we can build, and I trust you, I can invite you in.